Thank you so much for watching this video. I know that your time is precious, and my hope is that at the conclusion, you'll be encouraged, you'll have a deeper practical understanding of your child, and a renewed sense of the possibilities for your family's future. My name is Sandy Smith, and I am the NeuroDevelopmental Specialist at Carolina's Biofeedback Clinic in Charlotte, North Carolina. I'm the mom of 3 children who are all now grown adults. But through my own family, I faced many challenges. We had developmental delays, behavioral challenges, sensory issues, tantrums, traumas, academic challenges, and more. I also spent a portion of my career as an early childhood educator, so I have experienced struggling children as both a parent and as a teacher. Many of the challenges that our children face, whether it's focus and attention, learning, emotional regulation, or behavior, trace back to how our brains developed in the earliest weeks and months of life. During that time, the brain builds foundational connections that shape how we move, think, and relate to the world. When a child struggles with a task or a behavior, it doesn't mean that they can't succeed. Often it means certain foundational areas in the brain are immature or inefficient. The exciting part is that their brain isn't stuck that way. Our brains have neuroplasticity. They can learn, grow, and change at any age. With the right kinds of movement and experiences, we can actually fill in gaps in those foundational building blocks and see improvements in our children's day-to-day functioning. Improvements in focus and attention, in learning, in emotional regulation, and even behavior. The developmental sequence chart represents the summary of nearly 2 decades of research by a team who studied the link between early brain growth and lifelong abilities. In this video, we'll explore early development, consider how gaps reveal themselves in daily life, and discover how simple activities can bring new hope for the future. Okay, I'm gonna give you a fact that might startle you a little bit. We do not learn to move, we move in order to learn. Let me say it again. We do not learn to move, we move in order to learn. And the movements that we make in infancy are critical in determining whether we're going to have a mature, efficient brain or whether we're going to struggle throughout our entire lives with an immature, inefficient central nervous system. Our first year and 2 years of life is that important to the rest of our lives. And so what we're going to concentrate on tonight is the lower levels of how our brain develops in the first year, year and a half of life, and how that impacts us down the road. And then really what we can do about it. What hope is there for us if we have gaps? We're going to call them gaps. Let's kind of dig in. So we're going to talk about how early brain development impacts behavior and the ability to learn. Those are the 2 biggies, but there's a lot more pieces to it that we're going to see as we go through it. So when we're born, we come into the world. Remember, I said we do not learn to move, we move in order to learn. So as a newborn infant, we have movement. We can move our arms and our legs, but our movements are reflexive in nature, where the infant is not necessarily thinking, I would like to move my arm now, and they do. They move reflexively. And as we make reflexive movements, our brain learns what it feels like to move your arms. What does it feel like to move your legs? And as the brain is making those connections, we move up into the next layer. So it's not very long after the newborn stage that we get into that early first few months of life where everything is considered life or death. The infant that cries when they're 3 months old, they cry until you soothe them. They don't just stop because you say, hey, mommy's getting your bottle ready, or I'll feed you in 10 minutes. They need it right now. And they scream, and you hear them in the grocery store, and you go, oh, that's a little baby. That's that different cry. It's not very long before the next movement stage is we get up on our hands and knees and we start to learn balance. And the brain is learning all this time, all these different functions that we're going to talk about in a few minutes. There are specific functions that go along with each one of these movement stages. We hit the preschool years, now we can run, hop, skip, jump. We have an imagination, we have friends, we can have conversations, we make up stories, we hear stories, we remember stories. We have an opinion about what clothes we wear and what clothes we don't like and all of the different things, what foods we like and which ones we don't like. We hit the school age. Hopefully, by this point when we get to school, we are getting along with our friends, we're getting along with our teachers, we're getting along with our siblings, we're doing our chores at home, and we're not creating too much chaos in our house. Hopefully, we're getting along with our parents and our neighbors, and we're pleasant kids to be around who like to learn and whatnot. And then, hopefully, if we've done our jobs as parents, we produce good, fun adults, or this could be the parents going, we made it. They made it to adulthood. I'm not sure which way you can think of it either way. We grew productive citizens, or we're just happy that we survived the preschool years. Basically, we move through stages, and it's kind of logical to us. We know that. If you think about it, you know, infants don't come out of the birth canal walking and talking. They come out of the birth canal and they have to be held. And then they move through all the stages. And they do them in a particular order. That order of development is called the developmental sequence. And it's vital that we do the stages in order because they each build on each other as you move your way up and through them. So if we don't fully develop, if we don't complete development in one of the areas, we have what we refer to as a gap in development, or a gap in our functioning, and we can compensate for that, but it will always be a gap. It will always give us a little bit of trouble. All of us have gaps. We all walk around with them, but we typically have good coping skills and they don't impact our lives. It's when it's impacting our lives that we decide, I need to do something about this. The chart is the summary of about 2 decades of research that was done primarily in the 1950s and the early 60s by a group of researchers who not only studied infants, but they studied infants around the world. So they took the socioeconomic piece and the cultural piece out of human development. And they watched what will every human baby do if given the right environment. They studied infants in huts in Africa and high rises in New York and villages in France and all the world over. So what they were able to do was compile, this is how human beings develop. And what they realized is that as the human brain is developing, the functions are developing in layers. And so that's really what we're going to talk about. So when you look at the chart, going up, the rainbow colors going up this side are the time periods when actual brain structures are myelinating. And all that really means is that the connections in the brain are being made, connected, and then like myelin is think of it like a coating, almost like the electrical cords have a plastic coating that protects them. The myelin in our brain protects our connections. So as the brain makes connections, it then grows myelin around them that makes them permanent and protects them. So as the brain is myelinating each of these layers and the connections in that layer, they realized that across 6 functioning areas that the development was happening in those layers. So the 6 areas of functioning, there are 3 inputs. One is vision, our visual motor system, how we take in what we see and how we interpret that and how our eyes work and tell us what's going on in the world around us. Our auditory system, how we take in what we hear, how we interpret it, how we what we do with that information. And our tactile system, which is our touch, how we feel, but not just on the outside, like as someone touches us or how our clothing feels, but also internal feelings, like how do we interpret our emotions and how do we feel hunger, how do we feel pain, how do we feel our emotions is a piece of that one. The 3 on the right-hand side are the output functions. This is how we interact with the world. So we have mobility, that's our key one. Mobility is how we get around in the world. How do we go from point A to point B? And it changes over time, as we'll see in a minute. Language, how do we communicate with the world? How do we express our needs? How do we interact with the people around us? And then manual and hand function is unique to human beings. So all the other animals, I don't consider humans animals, but the rest of creation uses their upper limbs as a form of mobility, except for humans. We use ours to interact and to create. So even the animals that are up on their haunches, when they are in a hurry, they will go back to using their upper body as mobility primarily. We do not. Once we're up, we don't use our hands for mobility primarily anymore. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to work our way through the chart, but I'm going to start with the top because it makes everything else make sense. So everything from here up, from the green level up, are our cortical functions. Our cortex is the outer layer of our brain. It is our rational thinking brain. It is the brain that helps us make decisions, that helps us have coping skills, that helps us get through life. That is our thinking, teachable brain. This is the one where teachers in the classroom are working in the cortex. When you give your child instructions, you are addressing their cortical systems. When they are learning to play basketball, they are using their cortical systems. Everything below this red, orange, and yellow layers are what we're going to really talk about tonight, because these are the pre-cortical levels of the brain. These are the parts of the brain that developed before we really have a rational thinking brain. The infant in the delivery room does not rationalize, hey mom, that was a great trip, thanks. They can't talk, they can't rationalize, they are reflexive in nature. But as they get older, somewhere around 6 to 8 months, that cortex starts to kick in and an infant can start to make a decision. When you say no to a little 8-month or 9-month-old child, they will think about it and decide if they're going to do what you just told them not to do or not. So you know that that cortex is starting to kick in. It's not their primary brain until probably about a year old. So we're going to talk about all the precortical levels and what they do. Okay, so let's start at the bottom. The medulla and cord is the first brain. It is the newborn brain. It is what we are born with. It is the brain that is dominant from birth to about 6 to 8 weeks-ish. Now you'll see that the time levels, if you look at it closely, they overlap. And it's really not important for you to read all those little words on the chart, although you can later if you want to. It's the layout of it that makes it make sense. So when we look at the medulla and cord, it is the brain that we have that helps us stay alive. It's made up of lots of little reflexes, and those little movement reflexes are designed to help us be alive. So I'll give you an example. If you remember when you had a newborn baby, they had a rooting reflex. So if you rubbed them on the cheek, they would turn their head to that side and open their mouth. That is a movement reflex. That is not the infant going, oh, I'm supposed to turn my head. When they get the sensation, their reflex causes them to behave in a particular way. That is so that you can be fed. If you hold a baby up next to your breast, if you're a mom, and your breast rubs their cheek, what are they going to do? And there's dinner. Voila! That's how they stay alive. There are reflexes that we have that are designed to help us be born. So one of them, I'll demonstrate because it's just fun. Get my little chair here. So we have one called a spinal galant reflex that if you rub an infant, a newborn infant, just to the side of their spine, their opposite hip will wiggle. And so when you are in utero and the mother is having contractions and the contraction hits that part of the back, the hip wiggles. And so as the mother is having contractions and the hips are wiggling, that aids the baby in working its way down the birth canal, all the way down over the course of a couple of hours. Now there are other reflexes that are going on at the same time. This one integrates, which just means that it stops being reflexive and becomes integrated, so it's a voluntary movement. Rooting reflex is no longer reflexive for me. If you come up and rub me on the cheek, I am not going to turn my head and open my mouth. I can do it if I want to. It's voluntary. Some of our kids don't have that spinal galant reflex integrated because they need the movement that they make as infants. When you unswaddle an infant, what's the first thing that they do? They stretch and they move that trunk, and that's part of the movement that integrates that reflex. Well, if you have that reflex not integrated and you are in, let's say, 2nd grade, and you're in school and you're sitting in your chair, and your chair happens to hit that part of your back. So your hip wiggles. And then the other part of your back gets stimulated. And the next thing you know, you're sitting like this. And your teacher says, Sandy, sit up. Okay, yes, ma'am, I'm sitting up. And then the chair hits you again. And the next thing you know, your hips are wiggling without you even, it's reflexive, not voluntary. So the next thing you know, you're slouching again. These are our kids that have very poor posture and are very wiggly sitters because that part of their back is getting stimulated. They don't realize it and they're not in control of it. So what happens in 2nd grade when Sandy has now been sitting like this and the teacher has said to sit up 3 or 4 times? I'm tired of telling you to sit up. If I have to tell you again to sit up, then I'm going to send a note home to your mom. Well, I don't want a note sent home to my mom because then I don't get dessert. So I am not going to fall out of my chair. I am not going to slide. Oh, look at me. I am sitting up so straight. I am not wiggling. I am not falling out of my chair. I'm sitting up straight. My teacher's so happy. My mommy's going to be happy. And we're having chocolate cake for dinner. What did I not do? I didn't learn anything that the teacher was trying to teach me. No math facts, no reading, no social studies. Why? Because I spent my whole thinking rational brain compensating for something that should have been automatic. That's what, when you hear in the world of retained reflexes, why they have this list of things that it affects, it's because you have to spend your valuable cortical thinking brain to compensate for something that should be automatic. When I was a preschool teacher, at least one kid a year, if not more than one, would fall out of their chair. Unbeknownst to them or me as to why or how it happened, they would just be on the floor. And so you'd be like, sweetheart, are you okay? Uh-huh. Why did you fall? I don't know. They really didn't know. They had just slid right out of the chair and on the floor they go. Your kids at home who are fidgety at the dinner table or who can't sit up straight or have really poor posture may have that spinal galant reflex retained from this early level. So what do we have visually when we are a newborn baby? We can see about 10 inches. So amazingly, 10 inches is basically from your arm to the mother's eyes. And one of the interesting things is all a newborn baby and a first 6 months or so of life baby wants to look at is a human face. So there's been all kinds of research where infants will turn and attend to what looks like a human face over anything else, over colorful toys, over, they will even look at just splotches on a piece of paper, that look like 2 eyes, a nose, and a mouth. They will stop and attend to it. That's how much they want to see the human face. Well, here's a really cool thing. We're going to talk a little bit about hormones in a minute. But when you look in an infant's eyes, that 10 inches that they can see, both yours and the infant's pupils will dilate, and you both will rush with oxytocin, which is our love and cuddle hormone. That's why we love holding new babies so much. Like, you don't realize it, but your body is flooding with oxytocin, a love and cuddle hormone, when you are looking in a baby's eyes. Now, just as an aside, if the baby is looking to you and is trying to make that eye contact with a human being, and they don't get that response, their brain will flood with cortisol. And cortisol is the hormone that is our stress hormone, and it's brain poison. So we want to foster that oxytocin production. So look in your baby's eyes. If you're ever holding a newborn baby, don't scroll on a phone. Look at the baby, especially when they attend to you. All right, that's my little soapbox. Okay, their auditory system is their startle. So newborn babies, anytime the auditory system is stimulated, they will startle. It's why newborns seem to startle at anything. It is an indication that their auditory system has been stimulated, but not necessarily that there was a noise that you could hear. It is the waking up of that auditory system. We talked about the tactile reflexes a little bit. The movement of a newborn is just arms and legs will move. They have no ability to go anywhere yet, but they can wiggle their arms and their legs and their head. Their language is a little birth cry, almost a little peep. If you think about it, little babies coo a lot, and they have this little newborn, it's a cry, but it's different than the 3-month-old baby cry. If you know what I mean, there's a difference between that newborn cry and the next one up. They have a grasp reflex. If you touch something to a newborn's palm, their hand will close around it. Most of us women know about that one because it tends to be our hair that they grab. It's when something touches that hand, their hand will grasp close. That's a reflex. That's reflexive movement. What do? We have to pry it open. It won't open by itself. Every time we pry that little baby's hand open, a signal goes to the brain that says, this is what it feels like to have an open hand. And that is one step closer to the next stage up. So all those times that our babies grabbed our hair and we forced their hands open, we were actually letting the brain learn by movement, this is what it feels like to open and close my hand. And so that helps them move up into the next stage. Okay, that's our reflexive stage. It is basically there so that we can be born. All right, we're going to move up into what's the pons level. The pons is actually a little part of the brain. It sits right on top of the spinal cord, and it's teeny tiny. And that is the dominant brain during roughly the first 6 months of life. It is our emergency brain. This is the time, think of it as time periods. This is the time period when the part of our brain that controls fight, flight, or freeze is developing. So to this infant brain, at this layer, everything is interpreted as an emergency, life or death. So you see that in the reaction because that language piece for a baby in the first 6 months of life is a vital cry. Not the little birth cooing cry, but the vital one that says, I'm dying, come get me, rescue me. I feel hunger and I have to be fed. And they have to be fed right then. They don't stop crying until we calm them down, until we meet that need. You can't put them off. They don't have a rational thinking brain yet. So let's look at some of the specifics. Visually, what is going on in the first 6 months of life? The infant can see outlines, but not details. So we don't have a lot of separation anxiety in the first 6 months of life because the infant, when they look at the human face, they see eyes, nose, mouth. They can tell it's a human face. And they know who their mother is because they have been trained with her, and they know the sound of your voice, and they know your heart rhythms, and they know your breathing rhythms, but they can't see the details of your face yet. That comes a little bit later. We'll talk about that one on the next level up. What the brain is learning is how the nerves that control the muscles that move the eyes outward are being developed. So most infants are cross-eyed, or they go cross-eyed frequently. It's because those muscles are very immature. And as the brain is learning and developing, those eyes move outward. That is a protective instinct. They need to be able to see further than here. They need to be able to see all around them. So the eyes come out. When the infant is laying on their belly on the floor, this all-important tummy time that we talk about so much, the eyes are developing horizontal tracking. So the eyes, the movement of the eyes, the nerves that control that are being developed during the first 6 months of life. So what we want to see is smooth horizontal tracking. Why? Why is that so important? Because if you're trying to read, you need for your eyes to move across the page horizontally, smoothly. If they don't move smoothly, they might jump over words, especially the little words tend to get lost. So the these, the ands, the a's. So our kids that struggle with reading, sometimes it's because their eyes are jumping across the page and not moving smoothly. Or they might miss the letters in words. For example, they might see the word horse, but they saw hose. So they read, the hose jumped over the fence. Well, that doesn't make any sense. The hose jumped over the fence. So they go back to read and realize that it's horse because their eyes skipped right over the R. It has nothing to do with their intelligence of being smart enough to learn how to read. It may be that their eyes are not serving them well. And that develops in the first 6 months of life when the baby is on their belly on the floor. That is what develops good horizontal tracking. Okay, it's one of the reasons that you hear tummy time, tummy time, tummy time. The problem with the way that we have promoted it in society is that we're trying to get parents to do 10 or 15 minutes of it a day. And that's just not enough. And so part of the problem that we have is our infants are put into buckets where they are sitting up when they really need to be on the floor, where they can have those movement opportunities. Our auditory system, this is when there's a vital response. So we had to startle at everything as a newborn. Now we startle when there is a threatening sound or a sound that is interpreted as threatening to the infant. So that could be the closing of a door, the barking of a dog. Anything will elicit that startle from the infant, which also typically results in that vital cry where you have to go and respond to that baby. So I'll give you a great example. I have a workshop that I do called Brain Savvy Parents. It's for expectant and new parents that have babies. So let's talk about the things you can do to foster good brain development. And the last session of that, we bring the babies to the workshop and we put them on the floor and we use them as examples to review everything that we learned in the previous weeks. So I had these couples come and there was a 4-month-old baby and I was walking in with them. And I don't know if y'all noticed, but that front door makes a noise. It catches and it goes, whoop. And so they had the baby in the stroller. He's about 4 months old and that door made its noise and he went, his whole body startled and then he busted out crying. Now what was really beautiful was to see how his mom responded to him because she came around the stroller, she got right down in his face, she talked to him, she touched him, she soothed him, and he calmed right down. Like our infants look to us to see how to regulate their sensory systems. So he re-regulated very quickly, but it was a great example of that startle. He heard something, it's an emergency, I'm gonna cry because I might be dying. Everything is life and death to that emergency brain. All the brain really has access to at that time period is the fight, flight, or freeze response. So that's kind of what they do. Okay, we're going to spend a few minutes on this tactile area because it is incredibly important to our future functioning and to our future emotional functioning. During this time period, the brain is learning how to interpret the vital sensations, the sensations that help keep you alive, or the sensations of things that can kill you if not recognized. Hot, cold, pain, and hunger are the 4 main ones. Thirst is in there too, but that one's a little harder to, it's a little different. If you don't recognize pain immediately and appropriately, you typically do not understand what it means like to hurt someone else. So our kids that don't feel pain appropriately many times lack empathy. So these are the kids who can be bullies at school because they appear to not care. They don't understand what it feels like. If you don't feel pain, if something does not hurt you, you don't really understand what it means or what it feels like to hurt someone else. So sometimes what we see are kids who are very, very violent, the kiddos who in their meltdowns will hit, kick, bite, punch well past the age of normal biting. So if you have a 3, 4, 5, 10-year-old who still bites people, they probably have a very high pain threshold. So I've seen kids who really don't recognize pain, and one of the things I do in the assessment, if we are suspicious that a child has a high pain threshold, is I actually take a little piece of their skin and I grab it like this and I squeeze. And I tell them, tell me when you feel it, and don't let it hurt. Tell me when it starts to hurt. And as I'm increasing the squeezing, I'm counting in my head. And I have had little kids that I have done this till my hand is shaking, and I get to about 8, 9, 10, and I start to say, sweetheart, can you feel that? And I have had kids, and I have them blindfolded so they don't see what I'm doing. And they'll start laughing, kinda. Now, that hurts by about 4, 5. So what that tells me is, and what it translates to in that family, is an older brother who, especially when he's upset, will walk by and just whack his little sister. Or make her shut up. So we sometimes have impulsivity mixed with it, but that propensity to be able to hurt someone. Those are also the kids who have the ability to self-harm. That can be something as simple as the kids who pick their scabs repeatedly. And it's a curiosity for some, but that's a painful thing. The ones who will pick their cuticles until they bleed. I've had kids that come in to see me who the mom said, we typically have to keep Band-Aids around all their fingers because they will pick the cuticles until they all are just bloody and gross. Or they'll bite their nails down until they bleed. That hurts. That should hurt. In the extreme, it could be a kid who's playing soccer, gets kicked in the shin, breaks his leg, and keeps playing because he doesn't feel the pain immediately and appropriately that he should. What we see is kids that lack empathy. There's an emotional piece to that as well. The other vital sensations, hot and cold. If you don't feel hot appropriately, you can scald yourself. So kids that can't run their own bath because they will burn themselves. Or in the extreme, someone who can touch a heat register and get a burn and not realize it until you smell their skin burning because they don't feel it immediately and appropriately. And there's everything on the spectrum, like those are in the extremes, but there's also kids who don't dress appropriately for the weather. So you have a child who is going somewhere, like say to Carowinds, and comes downstairs in the parka. And you're like, it's 90 degrees outside, you don't need your parka. Mom, I need all these pockets. This coat has 10 pockets and I need them for all my stuff at Carowinds. Not having the ability to feel that he's going to be too hot, that is too hot for him. Or a child that will go outside in 35-degree weather barefooted and not even notice. Those are life-threatening sensations. Those are vital sensations that we need to feel appropriately so that we can protect ourselves. Okay, moving over to the mobility. This is our key.
Question.
Yes, absolutely.
So there are kids who don't feel pain, don't feel empathy. Is there the flip side of that?
Yes, that overfeel. Yes, that overfeel. It's typically the next one up. But yes, the ones who feel too much, and you can have an interesting combination of it because like the kids who are very averse to light touch, like they report everything hurts, is really, they're not actually feeling pain. It's not actually something that's going to hurt them, but they feel it as pain because their brain is not regulating how touch should feel. Does that make sense? And that one's the next layer up. Good question. Our mobility piece is belly crawling. So the 6-month-old infant, if put on the floor and barefooted and on a smooth surface with no blankets under them so they don't get all bunched up, they will scoot themselves across the floor. It will start with them kicking in their little toes, and their little toes will push them and they'll lurch. And the next thing you know, that little infant can scoot themselves across the floor on their belly. If you have a child that I screened for NDM during the brain map, one of the things I had them do was get on the floor on their belly and go from the carpet to the movie cabinet. What I'm looking at is the movement patterns. Is it an immature pattern? Can they get themselves across the floor? What do their arms and legs look like? Because by the patterns that they use to move tells me if this layer is immature. Our mobility layer, put a big star up here, is both the window in to that layer, and it is our access to that layer. So if you have a child that doesn't feel hot and cold appropriately, or doesn't feel hunger appropriately, are really picky eaters who can skip meals because it doesn't look right to them, they probably do not feel hunger appropriately, because we will not, by nature, let ourselves go hungry. The remedy for that, to tell the brain where to build neurons, is by the movement piece. So it is when we do the movement that triggers the brain to grow that entire layer. That's going to be the key, and we're going to hear more about it in a minute. Their language is that vital cry that you can't ignore. Think of it as in the newborn baby, that when you hear that cry, you know instantly it's a young baby, and you have this urge to go help it. We as humans are made to go meet that need. There is a cycle of response that needs to happen at this stage. This is when our brain develops its core foundational piece of safety and security. So in this time period, the brain is learning whether the world is a safe place for that little person, whether or not its actual world is safe. So it doesn't necessarily mean if a child this level is immature and the child doesn't have a good sense of safety and security, that they grew up in a house that was not safe and secure. Now, our children that did grow up in those kind of households typically have gaps in this level. I see this a lot more. It's more prevalent in the population of children who have been adopted or who have been in the foster care system, who have been neglected. But it's not only those children that have gaps here. It's just very common for them to have it. So when the infant cries at this stage, they need to be responded to so that that cycle of trust starts to get built. When I cry, my needs get met. And that has a whole emotional undertone, foundational piece that's really important for us as adults to feel like we are safe in the world. Sometimes what we see behaviorally from these kids is the ones who are very, very manipulative and very controlling, because they are getting their sense of safety by controlling the world around them, controlling what happens. They are very demanding. They might have big ragey meltdowns because they need to control, so that that's how they get their sense of safety and security. The hand function becomes a vital release. They can now open their hand. So that first grasp reflex was something touches the palm, it reflexively the hand closes. Now the infant learns how to open. So now is the time period when you can start handing the baby a rattle, and you put it in their hand and they'll grab it and they'll hold on to it a little bit, and then all of a sudden they'll let go of it, and they're learning what that means. Like in the beginning, it's kind of a fluke that they can open their hand on their own. Interestingly, we see this come back in stroke victims. That layer of the brain, that area of the brain gets injured, and that hand goes back to the grasp reflex. And we can help get some functioning back in the hand of a stroke victim with some of our patterns and some of our work. It's just very hard because they typically are older people, and getting down on the floor is really hard. But it is possible. Okay, any questions about the PONS level? That's where our fight, flight, or freeze response, it's the same time period. So think everything to the first 6 months of life child is an emergency. It's their emergency system is activating, and the brain is learning the emergencies. Everything is life or death. It's, I feel wet in my diaper, I must be drowning, wah, 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 wah. And you have to go meet that need, change that diaper, soothe the baby, and the baby goes, oh, okay, I'm okay. But they felt it and they got responded to. All of that is interpreted as an emergency. That's when that part of the brain is developing. Yes. Yes, it's the whole layer. It's just that these are the input systems, the way things come into us, and these are the outputs of how we communicate or how we move or how we function in the world. Does that make sense? So that entire layer develops during this time period, and the main movement of that time period is belly crawling. Any other questions? The midbrain we're going to spend a little bit more time on. Watching my time for you. This is it's roughly the second half of the first year of life. It can start kicking in as early as 3 months and then goes somewhere around the first year of life. Usually by the time the child is walking, we know that the cortex has kicked in because walking is a cortical skill. So walking and talking usually come about the same time. So first steps and first words usually are within about a month of each other. So this is the time period when we learn to relate and regulate. And that's going to be important for our kids with sensory issues and social skills issues. If you think about all the things that can fall under the heading of relating to people and regulating ourselves. So this is a big area for most of my kiddos that I see. This is a big area for them. So what's happening visually, the information that's coming in? Remember in our PONS level, it was horizontal tracking. The next layer up is vertical tracking. So this is when the brain is learning how to control the muscles, that the nerves that control the muscles that move the eyes up and down are being developed. So this is when babies start to point up, they start to notice birds and airplanes and all the things that are up above them, because now their eyes can actually move up there and see it. They can now see details. So the detail starts to come in. So now we get separation anxiety because the baby looks at your face and goes, that's mom, that's not mom. That's a familiar person, that's not a familiar person. So in the grocery store, if you're behind a little baby that's about 4 months old, you can probably make all kinds of faces and it'll smile at you and you're having this great fun time. But if the baby is a little older and you start talking to it, they very well might bust out crying because they know that you are not one of their familiar people. This is also when they can see details, as in they can see the crumbs on the floor and the dust bunnies on the floor. And it correlates with being able to get on their hands and knees and get somewhere so that they can now pick up the little tiny things that are on the floor. And what's the first thing they want to do? Stick them in their mouth. So it all develops at the same time. We know it intuitively that, about that age is when babies start getting into everything. Well, part of that's because now they can see the details. They can actually see the leftover goldfish that's on the floor. They can actually get there on their hands and knees pretty quickly before you can catch them. And their hand function is such that they can actually pick it up so that they can get it to their mouth. I'm going to talk about one that is actually a cortical skill, but it develops during the midbrain time period, and it's something called convergence. So we have horizontal tracking, we have vertical tracking. Convergence is the two eyes working together. So the newborn, we're cross-eyed. PONS level, the brain learns how to move those eyes outward. Midbrain level, the brain learns how to bring them back in and get them to work together, to focus on the same thing, working together at the same time. It is when we get depth perception, is the ability of our two eyes to work together. If you have poor convergence, you probably see things in double or blurry. But if you are a child and your eyes have never converged properly, you don't know that you don't see things clearly. You don't know what you're seeing. So a lot of our dyslexic symptoms are children who don't have good eye convergence because the brain doesn't like blurry, doesn't like double. So if one eye is converging here and one here, then you're going to get double vision. The brain takes double and goes, I can't do that. So it sends back words that wiggle, letters that move, things that sparkle. The brain goes, I don't know what to do with this, so I'm going to send you a signal, but it's not what's actually happening on the page. but it is real to that kid. Letters that move, words that fall off the page, all of those kinds of things that we hear about in our kids with dyslexia, reverse letters have their roots in our eyes being able to work together. If you think about infants, this is just a fun example. If you watch a little baby who is just learning to walk, and they're walking down a sidewalk and there's a crack in the sidewalk, have you ever noticed that they'll be toddling along, they get to the crack and they stop, and many times they'll get back down on their hands and knees and go over it as if it was a step. That's because their depth perception is not yet mature. They can't tell, they can see the crack, but they can't tell depth-wise, is it a step or is it a crack? So to be safe, they will get down on their hands and knees and go over it as if it was a step, and then they'll stand back up and walk again. That's just an example of that. It's still immature depth perception coming in. Curbs are hard for people with poor depth perception and poor convergence. For some of our kids, poor convergence can make walls look like they're leaning, or give you a hard time telling where you are in relation to other people. So some of our kids get in trouble at school because they walk with their hand on the wall as they walk down the hallway, and their teacher fusses at them. I did it as a teacher. Don't put your hands on the wall. You're getting, your fingerprints on our walls. You're getting your dirty hands on the walls, or you're picking up all the germs that are on the walls, whatever reason. Some of those kids are using that to help them know where the wall is and where they are. These are the same kind of kids that when I would line them up to go to the playground, they would all be in a line except for one, and one would be over here. It's like, sweetheart, you're not in line. Yes, I am. Visually, this kid thinks he's in line, but he's not. His eyes are giving him faulty information. It makes it very hard to read. It makes a lot of schoolwork really hard for these kids if their eyes are not serving them well. So that is actually, convergence is a cortical skill, but the foundations of it are built during the midbrain time period. That's why I mentioned it there. Auditory, meaningful sound appreciation. Okay, here comes our social skills. Meaningful sound appreciation to the infant is when we are learning what tone of voice feels like and sounds like. And you talk to a baby and they laugh at you or they make a face. They're learning what the nuances of our vocal interactions sound like. For our kiddos that are 8, 9, 10 years old, it looks like really poor social skills. They don't understand when someone's joking with them or when someone's being serious. They might not understand sarcasm. They might not understand jokes. They may have a hard time interpreting the meaning of someone's tone of voice. For example, little 4th grade boy out on the playground, and some kid walks up and he goes, "Yeah, right, you're my new best friend," and walks off. First little boy goes home. Mommy, I have a new best friend at school." Does he? No, that first little boy was being mean to him. But because he can't interpret the meaningful sound as it comes in, they misinterpret what people are saying. These are also kids who come in who might say to you, "Why are you always yelling at me?" And you're thinking, I almost never yell at you. Like, probably sometimes, but not very often. Or they come home and say, "My teacher hates us. She's always yelling at us. My teacher is so mean." And the best little friend who's over for a play date goes, "No, she's not. She's really pretty nice. She doesn't yell at us." But to that brain, that interpreting of what all the meaningful sound is a weakness. It's immature in them. Kids who have trouble following directions. If you took me and dropped me in, I don't know, in the middle of France, I do not speak French, but if you dropped me in France and set me in a school, and the French teacher is up there teaching, and she goes, blah, 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 blah. I know that there are 3 things I need to do. Now, I don't know what they are because I don't speak French, but just by the tone of her voice, I would know I have 3 things to do, and I would start looking around at cues from the other kids to see, okay, what do I need to do? Our kids who don't hear meaningful sound may not hear the change in the cadence of our voice. So when we give them 3 directions to do, go upstairs, brush your teeth, put your pajamas on, get your book out for your story tonight. They go upstairs, they brush their teeth. Did it, Mom? They didn't even know there were 3 things. And they probably have some memory things that we're going to talk about in a second, so they don't remember well either. But they don't even know that there were 3. In my classroom, I would have kids who were really good at following my first direction or my last direction. But I had a lot of them that missed either the other ones because they probably were not hearing the cadence in my voice. Or we used to call them our cute little butterflies, sweet little things that would be sitting on the floor for story time, little crisscross applesauce. We get done with the story, it's time to go to the playground. And I would say, okay, everybody, let's line up to go outside. And I would go put the book away. Turn around, my whole class is lined up except for one. Sweet little thing sitting on the floor, waiting, looking at the teacher chair, ready for whatever is going to come next. Did not hear or understand the change in my voice, that we are switching activities from this to this, or the change in your voice from speaking to your husband or your wife, having a conversation, to then speaking to them. The change in the tone and the cadence of our voice alerts us. Our kids who don't respond to their name, if you have to call your child over and over and over to come to dinner. I'll use my son Douglas as an example. So if I am calling to him, he's in the other room, Douglas, 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 Douglas. Oh, then I got his attention. That is, you should alert to your name right away. Your name is the most important word in the English language to you. So if I'm in a room of 30 people at a party and someone says my name, I will alert. I'm going to look to see who's talking about me. Who's talking to me? Do they need me? And then I realize, oh, there's another Sandy. Okay, and then I go about my day. But my auditory system alerted me right away because my name was called. So our kids that don't alert to their name or to that interruption or that change in the cadence of our voice probably have a gap in their auditory functioning. When we get to our tactile sense, this one's great fun. Tactile, oh, here's all the things. Sensory system. All the feels, the clothing feelings, the lights, the sounds, all that input that's coming at us in our sensory system, we tend to put it here. There are 3 things, and I'm going to show you some brainy pictures. There are 3 parts of our brain that are developing during this time period that are incredibly important to our future functioning. The thalamus is like our gatekeeper. So think of the thalamus as it takes in all of our sensory information and it sorts it for us. So it puts it into categories. This is important, pay attention to this. This is not important, you can ignore it. Or this is an emergency and it sends it into the amygdala, our fight, flight, or freeze, so that we can go into fight, flight, or freeze and protect ourselves. If our thalamus is inefficient and is not or immature, it may be telling us that everything is important. So our kids that are labeled ADD many times are over-attending. They're not attention deficit, they are over-attending because they're attending to everything. The thalamus is telling them that everything is important. Pay attention to this, pay attention to this, pay attention to this, pay attention to this. The thing that they need to be paying attention to, be it the teacher or be it you or be it, whatever, the coach, they're not able to because their brain is immature and it's telling them pay attention to everything. Pay attention to the sound of the fan and the lights that might be blinking and the kid next to you that likes to fidget and the fact that your sock in your shoe is twisted around and it feels a little bit funny. So you're paying attention to everything instead of being able to ignore things. Like if I'm wearing a pair of pants that are not my most comfortable, in a situation like this, my brain goes, you can ignore that. You can ignore that. That's not important right now because the most important thing is that I communicate with you, not that I worry about what my pants feel like right now. But our kids with sensory issues, their brain is telling them, pay attention to that. Pay attention to that sock bump. Pay attention to that tag in your shirt. Pay attention to it. Pay attention to it. Pay attention to it constantly. If you are doing neurofeedback, those of you who have had brain maps and you're doing neurofeedback, the interesting piece is that what the brain map shows us is when the thalamus isn't even getting a turn. So when Melanie does your map and she gives you your information, she is talking to you about the limbic system, the fight, flight, or freeze system, and when your brain is sending it straight to the limbic system And the thalamus isn't even getting, midbrain's not even getting its turn to sort it, because it should send emergency signals to you. If we heard something that sounded like a big crash out in the lobby, we would all jump and probably move to this side of the room to make sure that we were safe. When the limbic system is in control, all that information that's coming in gets treated like it's an emergency, whether it is or not. So what we can do with neurofeedback and with our brain mapping is that we can see what parts of your cortical brain are getting hijacked by your limbic system. And they're going to fight, flight, or freeze without this part even getting its turn to sort it for you. Okay, second part, the cerebellum. This is a part way back at the base and the back of our brain that is a key area for visual motor skills. So that horizontal tracking, vertical tracking, and convergence, balance, body awareness, and memory. So body awareness is a fun one. That is how we relate to other people and things bodily. So what that looks like in practical terms is sometimes it's a child who's clumsy. Maybe they bump into a lot of things. They might have a lot of bruises because they're constantly bumping into tables or running into chairs or tripping over things. It could be kids who, the ones in my class, that would step on my books. I love to read, and I love children's books. So I had lots of books. And I had children in my class that as the books were on the floor, I had children that would just walk on top of them and just step right on them. It used to drive me crazy. They did not have good body awareness of where they were walking, the awareness of what's going on in the room around you. It is also that personal space bubble. How do we relate to the people around us? So some of you may have met adults who are close talkers. The ones who, when you're talking to them, they're right here. And you take a step backwards, and the next thing you know, they're right here again. And you take a step back, and they're right here again. That's someone who has very poor body awareness. They don't realize, they don't know where their good body spacing should be. We kind of have a feel for where we should be and when it's uncomfortable and when it's not. It's an innate feeling that we have. Some of our kids are missing it. These are the ones that when I was teaching, when I would say, okay, kids, go sit down on the carpet for story time, there would always be one or two that would just about sit in their little friend's lap. Not because they were trying to pester them or irritate them, but because they just didn't have a good awareness of where their space was. And so in preschool, we had all kinds of little tactics of things we put on the floor, and you sit on the dots, or we would put tape on the tables. This is your area, to teach them. That's their cortex at work. I can teach you where your space is. That's our thinking rational brain. But the innate feeling is foundational. So for example, I could teach my kids, this is where you sit, this is your area. In preschool, we like to use those words, this is your bubble, stay in your bubble. So they had their little space. As soon as they quit thinking about where they were supposed to be, they would be in the next kid's lap. Not because they were trying to irritate them or irritate me or be a bad kid or be disobedient, but because they did not have good body awareness. It's the same thing if you're talking to that close talker person and you say, you're standing a little close to me. Oh, I'm so sorry. And they'll step back. But as soon as they engage in conversation again and they're not thinking about where they are, the next thing you know, they're right here again. That's because that innate sense is our body awareness. So for those of you who I screened your children at their mapping appointments, I did a test where they were blindfolded and I touched spots on their hand and their arm and their upper arm. And I'm looking to see how close were they for body awareness. Do they have a good awareness of where their body is? If I touch them here, they should touch within 1/4 of an inch of where I am. Many of them touch the wrong body part. There are some people who completely miss their arm. If they're blindfolded, they don't have the visual system to tell them where it is. They've got to do it solely by the feel of touch. And they have no idea where they are. These are kids who sometimes are clumsy. Spillers, the ones who reach out to get their cup and they miss it by just enough. That can be a mixture of bad convergence and poor body awareness mixed together. The ones who walk down the hallway and the line is here and they're over here, that's that convergence piece. But it can also be body awareness. They don't know where they're, or they line up right here. And so the child in front of them, they are too close, which is okay unless the child in front of you doesn't like to be touched. And then you get in trouble for being too close to them and pestering them and all those things that happen to us in school. Third important piece that's developing during the midbrain time period, this midbrain time, second half of the first 6 months, is the corpus callosum. And it looks like that. It is, they used to think its only purpose was to hold the two hemispheres of the brain together and keep them from falling apart. What we learned after technology got us to a point where we have MRIs and things that we can actually look at what's going on in the brain, is that there is an incredible amount of information that goes back and forth between the two hemispheres. And we have to transfer information back and forth constantly and at millions of pieces of information at a time. If our left-right hemisphere communication is inefficient or weak, then we may have very poor memory, because the brain knows where it stores things. So the brain stored math facts over here somewhere. I don't know where the math center of the brain is, but it's up there. And now you have a test at school and you've got to go retrieve those math facts. But you're nervous. So anytime we're stressed, we revert to a lower level of neurology. So our poor little kiddo gets to school and it's a timed test and there's a timer going and he cannot access because that information can't efficiently go back and forth. Now, all of your children, unless you have one that cannot walk, have a functioning corpus callosum because you cannot walk without it. But some of the things that helps us do are control our impulses. So think of it as in you have a little brother side of the brain and a big brother side of the brain. And the little brother side is impulsive and excitable, gets angry really easily, doesn't like to lose. And so when something happens, little brother brain gets going. And if big brother brain can't come across the corpus callosum to help him get his you-know-what together, then we have trouble. So little brother brain goes, oh, look, there's a sharp pen. I wonder what would happen if I poke somebody. Big brother brain could not get across the corpus callosum to go, oh, no, that's a bad idea. Or we're in school and, oh, it's mom's birthday. So we're really excited because we got mom a cool present and yay, we're so excited. And now we're off to the races. Big brother brain needs to be able to get across the corpus callosum to go, hey dude, we're in math class. You cannot do the happy dance right now, even though you're having chocolate cake for dessert tonight. Impulsive, the kid who walks by that's going to kick sister. That impulsivity, the side that's going to come across, the information that's going to come across and help you control those impulses is inefficient. Reading comprehension is a piece of this. We decode on one side of our brain and we create a little story about what we're reading, a little movie, so to speak, on the other side of our brain. So if you have a child who's a really good decoder that can read the words but can't comprehend what they've read, then you might have a corpus callosum issue. The other big one, emotional dysregulation. These are our kiddos that have meltdowns and they can't recover. So what happens is that little brother brain gets really upset. He lost a game, you told him no, he didn't get his way, whatever happened, and he gets upset. And once he gets going, the big brother brain that helps him regulate can't get across to help regulate. And so those meltdowns take an extraordinary amount of time to recover from. It is normal to get upset about things. We should never expect our children to never get upset. I taught 5-year-olds, they got upset over all kinds of funny things, especially if they lost a game. That was a big deal. But one of them falling out on the floor and crying for 30 minutes in my classroom was not typical and not normal. I did have some children through my teaching career that had monumental meltdowns. It's why they were in TK instead of kindergarten, because they could not regulate those emotions. And they would completely fall apart. And it would take some of them, upwards of 20 minutes to get it back together to where they could rejoin the classroom and be the sweetest, most pleasant children on the planet, but not in the middle of the meltdown. But after the meltdown, they are so great. They're these great kids who have these moments where their brain just is not organized well and is not efficient, so they can't get themselves back under control. That's all part of the things that are developing during midbrain. And we kind of put those in this tactile sense, that body awareness, the position, the ability to know where you are in space, the corpus callosum. That's the one that I do that looks like a robot. If you remember me doing the robot one, that's a test for corpus callosum. So if your child can't mirror what I was doing with them, then that's an indication that that corpus callosum is immature. The mobility piece of this time period is hands and knees creeping. This is when the brain has its first, starts to relate to gravity. The infant gets up on their hands and knees, and all of a sudden they are rocking around, and their brain is going, wait, I'm up and moving in different directions. And the brain is learning and the body is learning how to balance and how to relate to gravity. It gives us that left-right hemisphere. When the baby is creeping on their hands and knees, it will end in a cross pattern, which is right hand, left foot, left hand, right foot, working in coordination with each other. That is an exercise of the left and right hemispheres of the brain working together in coordination with each other. Language, creation of meaningful sounds. This is when babies start to babble, but in our older kids, what we find is that poor language development can be baby talk. It can look like the kids who talk like robots. I'll give you an example from my son. When he was in probably 3rd or 4th grade, I used to tell his teachers, you will know when he is headed for a meltdown because his voice pitch changes. So does his body. So I would say to them at the beginning of the year, just watch him. If you see him go from here to here, and his voice pitch goes up like this, and he starts to talk in a high-pitched monotone, be ready, because he's headed for meltdown. That was some of the cues that we had. But that was his lowest level of neurology was not a voice that had good tone and good inflection. He still, to this day, at 29 years old, does not understand his own tone of voice well, especially when he's upset. He sounds madder than a snake at us. He's really not, but he's trying to communicate with us, but he's at a much lower level of neurology. His vocal tone is bad. And it got him in a lot of trouble, especially as like a middle schooler, because that disrespectful tone would come out, and that's bad. The grasp, this is when we begin to grasp our pens, our pencils, or whatever. We go from being able to pick things up with our whole hand. It eventually moves into being able to use our pincers to pick up little things like Cheerios and goldfish and whatnot, and eventually works toward being able to hold our pens in the most efficient way for tool usage. So our hand function is the foundation of our hand function is what we need to be able to use utensils to eat well. So I have some clients that are 10 years old that are eating with their hands. They're not using utensils. Now, that's not everybody, but in some extremes, you have a child that either holds their pencil or their crayon still in a fist. That's a very immature pattern for holding a pen or pencil to color or write or do. The other thing that's just interesting is that we have a connection directly from our pointer finger to the language area of our brain. It's one of the reasons that we want that finger to be the one in charge of your writing utensils, because it's directly connected to the language area of your brain. Now, does that mean that if you write in a different way, like you have this finger here and it's the one in control, that you don't have good language skills? It does not. But it does mean that your brain has to work a little bit harder to do the tasks that you're asking it to do. But the most efficient use, especially in long term, so if you have a child that's in like 1st or 2nd grade and you're really trying to get that grip going, because as they get older, they're going to be required to write more and more and more. And this is the least exhausting, least fatiguing use of your hand manual function. This supination pronation, for those of you who are interested in fine motor skills, is this motion of our arms our two arm bones rotating, that function develops during belly crawling. So when your child belly crawls, eventually what will happen, most of them not at first, is that those arms will come around to the midpoint, pull them forward and flip and get out of the way. And so that crawl will go to a midpoint pull and the arms will flip. So one of the things I do in the big assessment is you'll see I have them, I'll say, can you do this? And they'll do this. And I'll say, can you flip? And then we'll speed it up and we'll see what it looks like. And what typically happens is I get arms that go out like this or like this or like this. And that's an indication that when we're under stress, because I speed them up, that we revert to that lowest level of ability. So they might be able to do this and this, although some of them will go like this and this, even though I'm doing this, because that's where their neurology is. And it's all automatic. So when I assess them, I am not giving them any instructions other than, can you do this? And just see what they do. So if you notice, like when I did horizontal tracking, I don't tell them, do move your head, don't move your head. Whatever they do is fine. When they get down on the floor to belly crawl, I don't say. All I say to them is, you can use your arms and legs any way you want to. I want to see what their brain is going to do automatically. And so that is one of the harder parts of the program, is that we don't teach them how to do all of these things. There's a lot in midbrain. Most of our kiddos that are struggling have a lot of midbrain gaps. Most of the kids I see will have, sometimes they'll have something here, and many times they'll have poor horizontal tracking, and their crawling will be immature. But typically, their PONS level is not terrible, it's just the foundational piece. But we may have something in every one of these areas of development when we look at them. Any questions? Y'all still with me? I haven't lost you yet. All right, so what can we do about it? Okay, so hopefully as you've been listening, you're going, that sounds like this kid, that sounds like this kid, that sounds like my kid, that sounds like my neighbor. So what can we do about it? So neurodevelopmental movement is a therapeutic program that is designed to be done at home in the context of a supportive family. It has 3 main parts, and the idea is it is movement, reflexes, and sensory. Movement, reflexes, and sensations work in a spiral to cause the brain to develop and to grow connections. You have to have all 3 parts in order to stimulate this lower brain growth. So for example, if you go to see an OT, they are working usually somewhere in here, either reflexes or sensory, but they are working in the cortex. So they might have your child doing motor planning activities, things like bear walks. So the idea is to get your hand and your foot to move together like a bear. That is, they're working in the cortex. They're working in your thinking rational brain because you're planning it out. When we work in the precortical levels, we're not going to give them instructions about how. We're going to let the brain develop it naturally and like it would have when they were infants. So we're going to replicate the movements that we made in infancy. So that means that I have 12 and 13-year-old boys who get down on the floor on their bellies and scoot themselves across the floor every day. Because the program is done with frequency, meaning every day. Intensity, we're going to be intentional about what we're doing, and we do it for a long duration because we are trying to grow neurons in the lower brain structures. And a neuron will grow the width of a human hair in a day if you do the program every day. So if you're trying to grow a connection that's that long, that's a lot of days that you need to be consistently doing the program. What is amazing to watch is how the body and the brain change automatically. So let's say you have a child that when we get down on the belly, they don't really engage their legs at all. So they just kind of drag their legs behind them. As they develop and as their legs start to engage, that upper lower body connection starts to happen. And then things start to happen in your life, like all of a sudden they gain more confidence. They begin to be more coordinated bodily, but also the empathy starts to develop because we have improved, we have told the brain to grow right there. So the 3 parts are movement. Typically it starts with movement on the floor. Belly crawling and hands and knees creeping are a part of almost every beginning program. That's because we can work in 2 layers at a time. So we address the lowest level first and work our way up. Once some of this is taken care of, if we have some cortical issues, we can do walking patterns. We have some other ones that are upright, but we get the creeping and crawling done first. It is every day, and it is the easiest hard thing your kid will ever do and the hardest easy thing that they will ever do. The patterns are, I put a metronome there because they are rhythmic reflexive patterns. They are body movements that used to be reflexes when you were an infant that are no longer reflexes, but we're going to do them in a rhythmic pattern because that triggers brain growth. It tells the brain, this is the layer I need you to work on. And so we have one in particularly, I use it in almost all the starting programs because it jump starts left-right hemisphere communication. And so many kids have trouble with that left and right hemisphere being disorganized or immature. And then the sensory piece is working on our vestibular system. That's body awareness, that's that cerebellum. It's body awareness, memory, balance, and visual motor skills. Those are your activities that stimulate the fluid in the inner ear. So in our inner ear, where that fluid is that the doctor checks to see if you have an ear infection, in that same area, you have teeny tiny little hairs, and on the top of those teeny tiny little hairs are little teeny tiny nerves. Those nerves have a direct connection to the cerebellum. So when we stimulate those nerves in the inner ear, we are sending signals directly to the cerebellum. That is the key area for memory, visual motor skills, body awareness, and balance. So as we do vestibular things, as we stimulate that fluid in the inner ear by spinning, by swinging, by flipping, by jumping, anything that gets that fluid sloshed and moving sends stimulation to the cerebellum and grows connections. So that's the 3rd piece of every program. Yes? A lot of times what I will tell kids that are real curious is I will use the analogy of I walk, not because I need to learn how to walk, but I walk to keep my heart healthy. So this is the same thing. We're going to belly crawl to get our brain healthy. I can't give them the specifics because if you teach them how, then they are doing it with their cortex and not with their lower brain structures. So the instructions will be your job, and the plan is, here's your, we call it, sometimes I call it an exercise program for a lot of the kids because they will get stronger. I'll say your assignment is, it could be time, it could be 5 minutes a day. A lot of times we do distance because it's just easier for kids. So your mom is in control of how much, and we'll talk about, the how much, because some kids have to start out really slow because they're really inefficient at it. And it's really hard to belly crawl if you're not using all your body parts. So it might just be that you get down the hallway and that's the end of, that's the day. And then the next day you go down the hallway again. And the 3rd day you go down the hallway again. And by day 4 or day 5, you're gonna go down the hallway and halfway back. And then you do that for a couple of days. And you're gonna build yourself up to going back and forth. Some kids can go back and forth with no problem. Some of these strong, 13, 14-year-old boys, even though they're very inefficient at it and it's not mature yet, they can scoot themselves across the floor. So they might do, 5 times back and forth, might be their assignment. I'm trying to think of, I just explain it to them as this is, we're gonna grow brain neurons in your lower brain structures. I don't usually tell them all the different things that they're lacking because they're kids. A lot of them will see it, but they'll see it down the road. So I had a kid that graduated back in February or March, and he was a big soccer player. And at about the 6-month mark, he started coming in and telling me his soccer game was getting better. He started to tell me about soccer. So I said to him at one of the appointments, okay, so can I tell you why your soccer game is getting better? And he looked at me, he's 12, so he's like, all right, hit me, And I said, well, your convergence is better. So when the ball is coming at you, you can tell where it is. Your depth perception is better. So you know when it's about to get to your foot. Your body awareness is better. So now you know when you kick the ball, what part of your foot is actually connecting with the ball, and now you have more power. You are using your lower body better than you used to, and your arms and legs are now aligning where they did not before. He was like, no way. Now, he's also one that had monumental meltdowns. 10-year-old kid on the floor screaming for 20 minutes, and his little sister was afraid of him. By about 9 months, maybe the 1 year mark, I said, how's it going between the two of them? She goes, well, she said, it's interesting. She said, they're relating much better, but she doesn't trust him yet. By the next appointment, 8 to 10 weeks later, I asked him, how's it going with your sister? He goes, oh, we're friends. We like hang out all the time. I said, what's your sister going to tell me? He goes, she would say the same thing. Now, she was on my mats playing with toys. And she goes, yeah, we play all the time. And so what the mom said was that it took her time to trust that her brother had actually changed, and that that she could relax around him again, or for the first time ever. So those kinds of changes I see them, they're not fast. It's not going to be in 2 weeks or 3 weeks. This is a long program. The average amount of time is a year to 18 months. If you're doing both NDM and neurofeedback, it's about 18 to 24 if you're just doing NDM. And it depends on how consistent you are at doing the program every day. And we have ways to motivate. If they're young, I make these dumb little games for them. If they're older, sometimes I encourage parents just pay them. What do 12 and 13-year-old boys or girls, what do they want? Cash. So you make it their job, and I have some cute little tactics of how they can really be motivated to do the program every day because it gets them more. I have some parents that use a point system, and the kids are trying to earn something with their points. There's a lot of that we'll talk about within the program. What is the next steps? So the first thing would be, if you need a phone consult, if you want to talk to me, those are free. The screenings are free. I do them with the brain map. So if your child had a brain map, most likely I already screened them, and I have the paperwork that I did, and I'd be happy to tell you if you weren't watching, I'll tell you what I saw. That just tells us it's the 6 most common things. So when I do a screening, I look at horizontal tracking and vertical tracking. I look at belly crawling and hands and knees creeping. I look at the left-right hemisphere, and I look at body awareness, because those are the most common things that I see, and they are the most impactful for families. So step 1 is a screening or a thing if you determine you need it. If you are listening and you're going, nope, this is my kid, you don't even have to do the screening. If you were to come and your child did not fall on this chart anywhere, I would not charge you for the initial assessment, but if it resonates with you, they're going to fall on the chart. The initial assessment is in 2 appointments because it's long. It's a solid 3 hours, sometimes close to 4. So I break it into 2 appointments. At the first one, we do a deep dive into your child's early history and your pregnancy to give us kind of the why. Sometimes we know, like if there's a child that was born with the cord wrapped around their neck and their face, they were blue, or they spent 3 weeks in the NICU. There's different things that we know. Baby had to have surgery at 3 days old and never could lay on their tummy because they had an incision down the middle of them. We know that caused gaps because we didn't get to do the normal developmental things. So we talk about the health history, and we talk about what are your current challenges? What's going on? What does it look like? What do your meltdowns look like? What triggers them? What's your child's sensory profile? How are they doing in school? How are their academics? How's their behavior? All of the things. How are their friendships? And I'll do the assessment pieces I'm looking at neurological soft signs. So those 6 things that I do in the screening, I actually have about 21 that I do for the assessment. So I'll repeat the ones I've done already to get a little bit more accurate view of them and better notes. I'll have them run, hop, skip, walk, belly crawl, hands and knees creep. I'll look at their convergence to see if their eyes are working together. I look at what their stress level, what happens to them, do they fall apart? So like, do they shut down if I introduce stress, and I introduce it by speeding them up? So if I tell them to go fast and they all of a sudden just shut down, that tells me something. It also tells me something if they're doing fine and all of a sudden their arms and legs are going in every direction. I even have one little guy who, when he got done with it, he came out here and ran laps around. He was just like, just all of a sudden that stress. So that gives you an idea of what happens to them in school. When we get stressed and we can't control our bodily movements anymore, what happens? We get sent to the principal's office. We get in trouble. We get a note sent home from school. That's not necessarily because we don't want to control ourselves. We don't have control over some of these things. Our automatic brain has taken over. So that's 2 appointments. Those 2 appointments together are called the initial assessment. The second appointment of those 2 is when I go over the results of the assessment and give you the program that I have designed for you. And we talk through and I teach you the patterns. We go over them, we practice them. All of that is in those 2 appointments. Step 4 is the reassessments, and they come every 8 to 10 weeks. We need at least 8 weeks of pretty consistent doing the program in order to see the changes that we want to be able to see. So somewhere 8 to 10 weeks, 10 to 12 weeks is when you'll come back. The program will change from time to time as you come back in. As the child is changing, we will add things, take away things. The patterns will change. We might add tactics to help them engage their feet. I can't tell when a child is belly crawling if they are going to, within a couple of months, engage their legs or not. And so we want the brain to do it automatically. But if they don't, then I have some tactics that we can add that kind of go, hey brain, I have a foot. I have a foot that can push me across the floor. The program will change, but basically it's about 30 to 40, maybe 45 minutes of activities. They can be spread out throughout the day. They can be done all in one chunk or they can be spread out. So some people take, 30 or 45 minutes and it's like at the end of homework time, this is when we do our program, and they just do it then. Other people will do 10 minutes, here, 5 minutes here, 5 minutes here. It's broken into, the biggest chunk would be 10 to 15 minutes at a time, and then everything else is 5-minute segments. You can arrange it's as long as you do it every day. It doesn't matter when you do it during the day. It's just that you consistently do the activities every day. Everything can be done with no equipment. So there's nothing else to buy or do.